For the third time in as many months, Islamic terrorists have massacred British citizens. First, the truck attack outside Parliament in March. That killed 7. Then 2 weeks ago, a suicide bomber murdered almost 24 in Manchester, many of them children, during that Ariana Grande concert. And now, on Saturday, 3 attackers screaming Islamic slogans mowed down pedestrians with a van in central London and then stabbed and slashed the survivors. 7 died. Many more were gravely wounded. London Bridge may not be falling down yet, but there is no doubt ISIS has a plan for that, too. Islamic terror attacks have become common in recent years, depressingly common, and each one provokes exactly the same response. Our leaders in government and the media tell us they're angry, and clearly they are, but at whom are they angry exactly? They shake their fists at the terrorists or the militants or the extremists or whatever the euphemism of the day happens to be at the time, and then they pledge that whatever happens, our civilization will never be bowed or shaken, although clearly we are both. But then they quickly turn their attention to the group they actually hate the most, far more than any terrorist, their critics. Anyone who dares question their leadership or criticizes their flaccid, mindless response to Islamic terror, those are their real enemies. Here, for example, is the response that Donald Trump got when he dared to point out that, to a large extent, terror in the West is an immigration problem.
Well, the president doesn't want us to be politically correct, right? So let's not be PC about this. Is the president trying to provoke a domestic terrorist attack with this Twitter rant, because only to prove himself right?
There are serious concerns about this president's mental stability.
President Trump has been commenting on the London terrorist attack via Twitter. One of his posts in the past few hours had, quote, "We must stop being politically correct and get down to the business of security for our people. If we don't get smart, it will only get worse." Do you feel the president is trying to perpetuate fear of terrorism by tweeting the way he has today?
When was the last time you heard anyone on the left talk that way about Islamic extremism? Now, nobody on television openly defends ISIS, of course. ISIS is impossible to defend. But the real rage of these people is reserved for those who appear critical of Islam. Terrorism may be bad, but raising doubts about multiculturalism is worse. Foreigners come to our countries and kill our people. You'd think our leaders would blame them, but no, they blame us who live here. They blame our history, they blame our culture, our opinions, our religion. It's our fault. That is their core assumption, and you see it in all they say. Why else, in the face of totalitarian threat, would they so eagerly abandon our freedoms, beginning with speech? In the UK, for example, there have been multiple arrests for Islamophobic remarks made online, not actions, remarks. In the U.S., where courts still rhetorically observe the Bill of Rights, it falls to the private sector to censor speech. Facebook, Twitter, cable news. But the results are the same. Fanatics from other countries want to force us to change the way we live, and our leaders are, in effect, helping them because on at least one point, our leaders agree with ISIS. The West is not worth defending. That's how they feel. Charles Krauthammer is a writer and columnist and resolute defender of the West, and he joins us tonight. So, Charles, why the displaced rage? I'm not defending the president's tweets. I don't think he ought to be tweeting at all. But you look at television, you would think that his crime is greater than the crime committed on London Bridge.
Look, you're always going to have lunatic voices on the left. Some will get expressed on cable TV. But generally speaking, this is not... Look, there are a lot of stories about the lunacy of the left. The suppression of speech on campus, the rioting, the sort of anti-fascist so-called rioting, if somebody dares say things politically incorrect. That's all true. Those are real stories. They ought to be covered. But the London attack is not really a media story. It's not a political correctness story. It's a story about Islamic radicalism. And the tragedy here is, the president is sort of right in talking about immigration. But the point he's missing is that the problem was immigration 30 years ago. We're 30 years late. The terrorists were 30 years old. This was a failure, and it generally is a failure, of assimilation, integration of these immigrants by mostly Europeans over the last 30 years, which is why it is not amenable to solution.
Well, but it is in this country because, of course, Europe is at least 30 years ahead of us on the same immigration path. And so you could, if you took it seriously, prevent to some extent what has happened in Europe. But it is also a political story when people are being arrested for criticizing a religion or voicing their political views. I mean, that is actually happening in Europe and has for a while.
They don't have the First Amendment. We don't have the same problem of assimilation. America is blessedly different in this regard, which is one reason why you have an epidemic of radical Islamic terrorism in Europe, and you don't have it here. And the one major attack, the one catastrophic attack, was entirely from outsiders who worked their way through our system. Here, what is the characteristic of the European attacks, so tragic and so hard to deal with, is the fact that these are British citizens raised in a country, second generation. Here are second generation immigrants, generally speaking. I'm not speaking about the Muslims in particular. Assimilate. That's the story of the Jews, the Italians, the Poles. And the third generation is so assimilable, you can hardly tell.
Do we know that?
That is not the case. Well,
the scale is so different. So this country is, what, 1% Muslim? France, we don't know exactly, but maybe 10%. I mean, it's a much different scale in Europe from what it is here.
Absolutely. 10% of the population in France is estimated to be Muslim immigrants. No, it's a question of scale, but it's a question of also history. We have a history of being able to import immigrants in a way and to make them into Americans. But that is true. The question of scale is important. It's one of the reasons why people here are so strongly against illegal immigration, because the fear is that this is sort of a monoclonal immigration. It's Hispanic-speaking, mostly Mexican, which is wonderful. But the problem is that if they become a critical mass in certain parts of the country, then you get a problem of assimilation where people end up not speaking the language and not integrating. In Brooklyn, for example, you've got 150 nationalities, but they are so relatively small that the assimilation almost is automatic. That's been our history for 150 years.
But don't you think our attitudes have changed? Assimilation doesn't happen. We were talking about this in the commercial break. It doesn't happen unless the host country demands it and says, here's our culture, here's our language, here are our values, adopt them or leave. Normal countries do that. We don't do that anymore.
Well, we do it to a certain extent. I think the bilingual education fad was a terrible mistake because it created separateness. When you add to that the monoclonal immigration, meaning it's not from around the world, it's not from, equally distributed the way it was 100 years ago at Ellis Island, but it is mostly Hispanic speaking, and you end up in a community where you don't get to learn English. That, I think, is the problem. But you're right. There is a loss of spirit in the West, not so much in the U.S. as in Europe, where we don't believe in ourselves, where our history is flawed, where we teach our kids all of the sins of the American Republic and none of the glories. When you do that for a long enough time, you end up with a generation that doesn't know why they should be proud to be American.
Well, exactly. And
why they should be defending America. We are not anywhere near there, but that's the danger.
It seems like we are. I mean, what are our shared values? If you believe in multiculturalism, then by definition, you're not going to rise to defend your culture because it's equal to every other culture.
Well, it depends how you define multiculturalism. I mean, we are a multicultural nation, and we accord respect to the different religions, ethnicities, languages. It's when you say that our own history is so corrupt that our tradition is the one that is uniquely the one that is not worth learning. That's when you run into problems.
What?
I don't think we're near there, but there is a danger, and I think we need to be very careful how we handle that, or we could raise generations that don't know why they should be proud to be Americans and why they should be Americans.
I hope we're as far from that as you say. Charles Krauthammer, thank you.
My pleasure.
Turns out that Karam Butt is one of the London Bridge attackers, apparently, was featured in a recent British documentary called The Jihadist Next Door. Fox News has not yet confirmed that it was him in the video, but Sky News, CNN, The New York Times, and Channel 4 have all reported it is, in fact, him. In any case, the man appears in the documentary attending a rally in a park where a radical preacher predicts that one day the entirety of Britain will be ruled by Sharia law. Watch this.
The only English white person who's a non-Muslim was part of our group. But because he's white and he's English, he can go. But all of us that were just praying, we have to stay. This is the reality.
This is the reality.
This is the reality. Don't forget all the laws and all this. This is the reality.
There's no reason for us to be detained. There's no evidence.
We were just praying. We can't pray as well.
Once again, it looks like this man's extremism was obvious for years, but the attack it caused was somehow a surprise, as it always is. President Trump is using the London attack to lobby for the return of his travel ban that would affect 6 countries. Muslim-majority countries. On Saturday night, the president tweeted this: "We need to be smart, vigilant, and tough. We need the courts to give us back our rights. We need the travel ban as an extra level of safety." And today he wrote this: "People, the lawyers, and the courts can call it whatever they want to, but I'm calling it what we need." And what it is: a travel ban. A travel ban is a toned-down version of what the president called for on the campaign trail in 2015.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Mustafa Tamiz is a Democratic strategist and a former consultant to the Department of Homeland Security, and he joins us tonight. Thanks a lot for coming on. Now, all the focus has been on the president's motives in this. What does he really mean? What does he desire personally? And I guess I would say that's unknowable, as it always is with people's motives. The question is, does the country deserve a higher level of protection in light of what we're watching happen in Europe? And I don't see how we don't deserve that.
No, I agree with you that we need a higher level of protection, especially nowadays. But we have to identify where the threat is. As Charles was saying, you know, many of these radicals are homegrown, meaning that they've not come from somewhere else. They've grown within these countries. And so we've got to counter violent extremism and make sure that the ISIS's narrative of a clash of civilization is not the one that we adopt. And you're right. Nobody knows President Trump's motive. What we're concerned about is that sometimes his rhetoric inflames that. And that's the concern by the intelligence organizations,
okay, but this
counterterrorism groups.
I guess. I mean, it's hard to generalize about intelligence organizations or counter-intel people. I mean, it's a huge group. But look, this has been going on for a long time. You can hardly blame his intemperate language for all of it. But in the 18 terror plots that have been foiled in the last couple of years, 2/3 were hatched apparently by people who would be affected by this temporary stop on immigration from those countries. So why would that have been a bad thing? 2/3.
Look, I don't know. Like, Cato Institute did a study, and they looked at people from 1975 to 2015, and, you know, 3.5 million refugees have come here. Not a single one has committed a terrorist attack. So that's just a big number. And so we have to do this as the world is, rather than the way sometimes maybe the president and others might want to see it. This is not a clash of civilization. We've got to effectively, from law enforcement and intelligence and human intelligence, go after the threat. And doing the travel ban is not the most effective way. And that comes from
look, I'm sorry, you threw out a
country.
fake statistic. I don't know if some think tank gave it to you, but I mean, here are the actual
Cato
numbers
Institute
on this.
is a notable think tank on the conservative side.
I'm not attacking. I'm just saying, here are the actual facts. May 17th, 2016, two guys from Somalia busted with bomb-making material. November 16th, another guy from Somalia, Ohio State attack, as you know. September 16th, another Somalian. Here's another Afghan, Somalian, Iraqi, Somalian, Iraq, Sudan, Iraq. I mean, this is all within the span of a year, people arrested for terror plotting. Look, I'm not impugning everyone from Somalia. I'm just saying this is real.
Well, the real threat is homegrown terrorism, which we have to go after. Charles is right. When Charles was talking about that this is second, third generation in Europe that have not assimilated. And one of the reasons why the assimilation hasn't occurred is Europe created a hostile environment for those people that were coming into this country. And what we don't want to do is we make the United States.
You know what? I'm sorry. I just can't. I can't let that stand. So you're saying that people attack the West because the West somehow isn't nice enough to them? Welcoming them into. Yeah, you just said that. You said, come on now, I'm trying to keep this civil. But I've got to say, it's grating to hear someone say that they face a hostile environment when they're brought over here at public expense and subsidized. Like, how is that hostile? I'm missing that.
Look. If you study counterterrorism and you look at Europe, what's made the environment really bad is many of these folks don't feel like they have opportunities and creates a false narrative. What the beauty of America is our hyphen. The first day that you land into the United States, you're an Italian American, you're an Irish American, you're a Jewish American, you're a Muslim American. That hyphen allows everybody to have their American identity. And that is something that Europe doesn't have. You have second, third, fourth generation people there that still consider themselves from the land that they came from.
And that's the Brits' fault. So the people who were murdered in Manchester, their kids, it's their fault because they just weren't welcoming enough? Like, what are you saying exactly?
what I'm saying is that we have to learn from their experience and make sure what we do here doesn't take place.
What we do?
You know,
America, they let in all these people who are now trying to kill them, and it's their fault.
What's different is that we are a country of immigrants bred from religious freedom. Those are our cornerstone principles, and that principle has allowed us to grow and flourish for over 200 years.
Okay,
this is
I'm
something
fully
that we
aware
should
of
build
that.
a nation on.
But are you saying that Muslims don't experience religious freedom in Great Britain?
Look, what I'm telling
you
is
saying?
based on
Exactly.
what I'm saying is that terrorists want to hurt and kill us, and the way they do it is by dividing. They're looking to recruit people that are within these countries. Online, there are recruiters that are looking for people that feel like there is a wedge in society. And by rather than creating more wedges and making the environment more fertile for people to recruit, we've got to figure out a way to push back, hunt down, and kill them.
What you're doing, I mean, you know, part of what you're saying is right, but the subtext is the same as it always is, which is blaming the victims for this. The Brits didn't deserve this. Yes, it is true.
That's not
you
true.
just suggested that they created a hostile
I'm
environment for immigrants and that they somehow abridged their religious liberty. Yes, you did.
I'm not the one that started tweeting against the mayor of London right after a terrorist attack. That's what President Trump did.
Well, he's not
President
here.
Trump is creating a divisive environment.
So it's his fault.
I'm telling you how the divisive environment gets created.
It's always the fault of an American, I've noticed. Okay.
Look,
so maybe it's the fault of the people who come here and use the public resources.
You know, I'm an American, and I don't want the fault of our nation. Like, I'm as equally American as any other American.
But I'm not contesting that. I'm merely objecting to your instinct to blame the victims in Europe for the attacks upon them.
You're blaming the victim.
You
Those are the
said
words
they
that you're
created a
using,
hostile
Tucker.
environment, and I'm watching and have for 30 years. Very much the opposite.
That is part of the challenge, because when you want people to assimilate, it's a two-way interaction. The people coming in the country have to want to assimilate, and the nation, the host nation, has to assimilate them. So when 2, 3, 4 generations go in and the assimilation is not occurring, we have to figure out, you know, what the problem is. The beauty of our nation is that people assimilate much faster than in Europe because of the American hyphen.
If we complain about refugees or immigrants coming in from a certain region, then we're somehow abetting terrorism. It's a fantastic rhetorical trick you've devised to get people to shut up, but it doesn't work with me.
I think you're playing I'm not trying to shut you up, Tucker. God forbid I'm trying to shut you up.
But you're saying basically anybody who complains is abetting ISIS.
That's what you're saying.
Not true.
That's what you're saying. These are your words. These are not my words. These are your interpretations. This is where the wedge begins to know
what you're saying. I'm not that smart, but I know what you're really saying.
I'm not sure if it's clever or...
Okay. We're going to let our viewers judge, right?